Okay, so this is information on filling out the accommodations test room report for both the test coordinator and the room supervisor. The test coordinator should already have this portion completed. So before testing, ACT High School Code, the state, the timing code, wherever the timing code is, needs to go here. Um, the student, sorry, the school name, and then the test dates needs to go here. That can be completed actually at the end because if you put a beginning, you may need an extra day for testing during that accommodations period. Make sure one of these is checked off. It's usually going to be testing at school. You're very rarely going to test off-site. Let's go ahead and leave this until the end. You're going to determine from this part here, the number that will go here. All right, and then the number of staff in the room, you can put that at the end. So notice of two or more, you must enter the names of the persons, of the proctors. Okay, you can complete this part of the end. This can be test coordinated, so this part of the end. So the top portion will be the test coordinated to complete at some point, either before testing or after testing. For the room supervisor, let's go to this page here. So that's page 2 for the room supervisor. The room supervisor is going to have to complete this part. So the first thing you have to make sure you read the directions. So it says complete blocks 1 through 4 during testing. So that's where the room supervisor has to complete this. So it's very important on page 13 of the administration manual for accommodations. Administration manual, accommodations, make sure it's accommodations. On page 13, you need to familiarize yourself with seating arrangements that are acceptable and non-acceptable. Unacceptable. So that's on page 13. Make sure that you indicate the room types, whether it's single level, multi-level. Hopefully it's single level. We did indicate to test coordinators that they should refrain from using multi-level seating. Single level. You do have to indicate whether it's a desk, like a student desk, or a table that the students are seated on. Notice that if it's a round table, hopefully you're not using round tables, but if it's a round table, you can only seat one student at a table, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to seat students in a room with round tables. Okay, so you do have to, if it's a desk, you do have to measure the, kind of estimate what the writing surface is. So it did have inches. If you needed to write it in feet, put feet. Same thing for table. The shoulder to shoulder length, it should be a minimum of 3 feet. So make sure that students are no less than 2 feet from shoulder to shoulder. 3 feet from shoulder to shoulder. It must be at least 3 feet from head to head for single level. Okay, if it's multi-level, hopefully you're not using multi-level, then it needs to be 5 feet. Okay, now let's go to the back page. So the back page should already be completed by the test coordinator. Again, that has to already be completed. The room supervisor should not be completing this. It should already be completed by the test coordinator in advance of test day. Time and code should already be listed here. Okay, now here's what the room supervisor or the proctor would need to do in this case. Before the students enter the room, they need to be admitted. Do not let students go into a room without being admitted, without checking information. So if Michael Joe shows up to test, you're either going to check off that Michael had a picture ID, a student ID. If Cynthia shows up and Cynthia does not have a picture ID, but you do recognize Cynthia, then you'd put an R in your initials. Okay? If Elizabeth doesn't show up at all before testing begins, before you start distributing the test materials, the test booklet, If Elizabeth does not show up, you're going to put a dash here. All right, so if you're in the room and you're about to get ready to distribute materials and Elizabeth shows up, you can admit Elizabeth. But once the first student gets that first booklet, then Elizabeth cannot be tested in that room during that day. All right, and then if Bobby shows up and you don't recognize the student and Bobby does not recognize the student, but there is a staff member that recognizes the student, then the staff member can recognize the student. So the other staff member would have to put an R here and their initial. So whatever their initial is, and so on. Okay. Now notice that for this particular timing code, it's multiple days. So you may want to in these columns kind of you may want to on day 1. This would be day 1, and then day 2. I wrote too big, but in day 2 you would kind of do another one, picture ID. So let's say on day 2, this student had a photo of where, well, you would probably recognize the student again. So you do an R and the initial. Okay, so since we are doing multiple days, just go ahead and do it that way. All right, now so that's going to take care of this. Now, if for some reason you just have it listed once here, that's fine. All right, that's fine. It's up to your test coordinator to determine how they want to approach each day for this part. Okay. All right. Now let's go ahead and talk about this part here. Okay, so the room supervisor will need to complete this part here. The room supervisor may complete this part here. So let's first of all talk about how you're going to distribute material. So that's going to be on page 27 of the manual, page 27. So make sure you have read in advance, so this should have been done during training, how to handle materials on test day. So how to distribute test materials. All right, so your test booklet should already be in sequential serial number. So you're going to start with the first one. However you do this, start with the first one, however they're seated, and then go like this. Okay? However they're seated. They're seated. Just make sure it's in sequential order. The reason that that's important is because during testing, the first test, you're going to list the serial number. Now, MC stands for multiple choice, W stands for writing. We don't do W, so the serial number should not go here. The serial number of the test booklet should go here. So the serial number is, I'm just making this number up, 101, and that's going to go here. If the next serial number, if the next student's right here, remember sequential order, so that should be 102. Then the next one should be 103. The next one should be 104, and so on. 105, and let's say the next student is right here. So it'll be 106, 107, 108, and so on. All right, so however you distribute it, okay? Serial number needs to go here. Now, it's also a good idea to put the student's name right under here. So the student's name is Jane Doe, and put the student name there. So that does it could help the room supervisor the test coordinator at some point if there's a irregularity and needs to be investigated. So you can determine very easily who was seated in this area here. So Jane Doe was here, Joe Dean was here, and so on. Okay, so it is a good idea to put the student name along with the serial number, but the serial number must be listed. You have no choice. If the serial number is not listed, the test coordinator has a lot of work to do at the end. Okay, so make sure you familiarize yourself with page 27 of the manual to see how to distribute test materials. Again, it has to be in sequential serial number order. All right, so again, serial number goes here. serial number goes here in sequential order. Put the student's name as well. Put the student's name as well. In case there's an irregularity and there's an investigation, we need to know which student was seated there. Okay, so that's going to take care of that part. All right, now let's talk about completing this part. The room supervisor will complete this part. So the students enter the room. The students enter the room, or the proctor. The proctor can complete this part as well. Does not matter. So let's say from here, Michael showed up. So put Michael's name here. And this is test one. And also keep in mind as must be in the correct order. So English must be first. Math must be second. Reading must be third. Science must be fourth. We do not do the writing test, so there should be no information in this column. All right, so again, test one is English. The second test a student takes must be math. The third test a student takes must be reading. The fourth test a student takes must be science, in that order. So the dates are going to be important here. So this date should be before this date, and so on. Okay, so whoever is in that room for testing, no matter what day it is, needs to go here. So let's say that Elizabeth right here, Elizabeth didn't show up at all for any of the days during the testing window. And Elizabeth was the only one. Then Elizabeth would not be listed here. Everybody else will be listed here. So Mike will be listed here. Cynthia. Elizabeth would not. Make sure you put the last name. Bobby. And so on. Okay? Lori. Debbie. And Sonia. All right? So make sure you put the first and last name. Okay, so only those students that were there for testing needs to be listed here. Secondly, I need to remind you of this. If you have if your group right here, if your accommodations group has on their IEP has a small group, then there should not be more than 8 students here. If there's more than 8, you need to have a discussion with the test coordinator. So if you see more than 8 and all these students are on their IEP, have small groups, then there's an issue here. So there's got to be 8 or less. 8 or less. We are talking about accommodations. If these students have small group accommodations, 8 or less. All right. Now, let's talk about completing this part. So the timing code, make sure you're in your training. The test coordinator indicated that all students must test that are testing in the same room must have the same timing code. So there should not be any other timing codes than the ones that are that should be in that room. So if you have timing code 7, timing code 6, then there's an issue. They should all be the same timing code. So that's going to be important. The timing codes must be the same. Also, I want to, at this point, want to say this. In your training, your room supervisor gave you, your test coordinator. Your test coordinator gave you your manual. You also had a little sticky note to identify where your timing code starts. So timing code 7, make sure it's important you're using the right page number where timing code 7 starts. So in this case, timing code 7 starts, it says it up here as well, timing code 7, but it actually starts on page 106. If I can get to it. Page 106, that's where timing code 7 starts. In your training, room supervisors and proctors, you were always also told, and you can't see it well here because this is a copy, that anything that's shaded needs to be read verbatim, exactly as is. Do not summarize. It needs to be read verbatim. Okay, so when you get to that part, it needs to be read verbatim. So in advance to testing day, you need to have read this part so you'll know what to read, what to look at before reading the verbatim one. So remember, the test one for timing code 7 says it here is 70 minutes. So the number of minutes is also listed in the directions. So it says you're going to read this part. You have 70 minutes to work on this test. Okay. For math, same thing. So for the math test, um, now in this case they do talk about the calculators. So at some point it's going to be very important that you check calculators. But the timing code here, I'm sorry, the number of minutes here is 90. So it says you have 90 minutes to work on this test. Okay, so you can't see it here, but this was shaded. So anything shaded, you have to read. Okay, now also, so your room supervisor, your test coordinator, already have a little sticky note here, so that indicates that you're doing timing code 7. There are all different timing codes in here, so it's very important you are using the correct timing code. And do not vary from those minutes. Do not double these minutes. Do not add any more minutes, because then that's an irregularity. You have a missed timing. So this should be at most 70 minutes for test 1. Okay, now the other thing I need to remind you is this. All of you, regardless of the timing codes, if I can find it real quickly, all of you will go to this first. So all of you are going to start on page 54. That's where you're all going to start. So you're going to make sure in advance, before you begin, you read this, reading the verbal instructions. So before test day, you've read all this. That was part of your training. And then they talk about English learner supports. We do the writing, so this is the part you're going to read. So make sure in advance you've read this part. So anything in that's shaded, you read to them. So everyone, regardless of the timing code, will start on page 54. 54. All right, so begin testing. So it says, after all examinees have been admitted, seated, and have a pencil, greet the examinees and make any general announcements, then begin the verbal instructions. Okay? Now, remember your test coordinator talked to you about the cell phones or smartwatches or fitness bands, any electronic device. It should not be in the room. So it needs to have been collected before the students entered the room. So there should have been, in days before testing, announcements about this. All right, so don't you got to reword this, because this part says that if they have it, they need to turn it off. But that's not what our policy says. You got to use EBR's policy. EBR's policy says it cannot be in the room. And also the room supervisor and proctor cannot have a cell phone in the room as well. So make sure that you as well do not have a cell phone or any electronic device. You do not want any voided test or any irregularity. Okay, now let's go back to this page. So test 1, you're going to put the date. So let's say the test 1 was on March 17th. So we're going to put 3/17 and 3/17. Now, there's a possibility. There is a possibility. Now remember, on test 1, you can list all the students there on test 1. So 3/17, 3/17, 3/17, and so on. Now this is important. It says dates and minutes. The minutes here is the number of minutes it took each student to complete the test. They should, if there are any students that completed the test before time is called, then all this should not be 70. Remember, there are 70 minutes for timing code 7. These should not all be the same. If any students finish before other students, then these times needs to be different. These times need to be different. So if Michael, and you need to have some kind of watch. It cannot be a smart watch. It cannot be. Do not use your cell phone. So your school should have provided you with some kind of stopwatch or timer to do this. So you need to make sure that if Michael finishes the test in 62 minutes, you put 62. If Cynthia finished test 1 in 38 minutes, you put 38. If Bobby finished it in 10 minutes, you put 10 minutes. If Lori finished it in, let's say 22 minutes, you put 22. If Debbie and Sonia finished it, actually did not finish, but time is called, then you're going to put 70. So if Bobby and Sonia did not finish the test, you must put 70. Okay, now let's go back to this page. This right here. Okay, so we're talking about test 1. So this right here, these little boxes here are important. This is test 1, this is test 2, this is test 3, this is test 4. So at the end of test 1 and during test 2, the student has their answer document next to the test. The student has the answer document. You are the room supervisor is to go around and estimate how many ovals, how many items Jane Doe did not answer. So if Jane Doe did not answer, let's say, an estimated 10 items, then you put 10 here. If Joe Dean does not have any ovals unmarked, then you put 0. All right, so let's go ahead and let these numbers be the number of items that have not been answered. So 0 means that they've all been answered. 10 here means that Jane Doe has 10 items, about 10 items that are not answered. Now, don't go next to the student and count these things. That's interrupting the students. You just glance, estimate, and then write it down. Now, remember, it's a good idea to put the names here. So that's another reason why you want to put the names. So let's say this is Susan Doe, whatever it may be. So you put, let's say there are 4 here. Okay, now here's why that's important. So let's say during test 3, you notice that Jane Doe, on the answer document, all of the ovals have been answered, but then you had a 10 here. So that's an irregularity. The student needs to be dismissed. Now you need to contact the test coordinator. The test coordinator will dismiss the student for an irregularity. All right, so that's important. So prior to testing, the test coordinator needs to inform the students that what could happen if they are completing answers on a prior test during another test. It is voided. And they are dismissed and they cannot do a makeup. There is no makeup for that situation. Okay, so make sure you understand this. If you don't understand what I just said, talk to your test coordinator. Okay, so then let's talk about test 2. So test 2, remember this is multiple days, so test 2 will be on a different day. So let's say test 2 is on the 19th, and Michael shows up. Cynthia does not show up. Bobby shows up. Lori shows up. Debbie does not show up. Sonia shows up. Okay? So these are the individuals that showed up on that day. You do the same thing. You count the number of minutes. So when a student finishes a test, you indicate the minutes. So let's say, now test 2, remember, was 90 minutes. 90 minutes. So it's a good idea if you want to, you put 70 here, 90 here, and then whatever test 3 is. Let me go back to timing code 7. Remember, this is timing code 7, so make sure I'm using this example timing code 7. The other timing codes are different. And test 3 is, let's see, test 3 is 55 minutes. All right, and you do the same thing. All right, so let's say that Michael took 82 minutes. Bobby took 45 minutes. And then let's say that, again, Lori and Sonia did not finish the test when time was called, so you're going to put 90. You're going to put 90. Now, let's talk about Cynthia and Debbie. So Cynthia and Debbie were not there for test 2. Before Cynthia and Debbie can go to test 3, they have to do test 2. These dates have to be in order. So if in this example the students are testing every other day. So if Cynthia and Debbie were absent on the 19th, then the next day, let's say the 20th, they're there. So the test coordinator will then go ahead and let those students test. So this would be 320. And then the room supervisor would then indicate the number of minutes. So let's say it's 72, and let's say it's 70 minutes here. Okay? So then the next day, they all show up. So then you'll put whatever day that is. Let's say it's 321. I'm making this up. 321. Let's say they all showed up. Okay? Then you indicate the number of minutes. 41, 50 minutes. And let's say these students here did not finish at all. Time was called. So you put 55, 55, 55, 55. Okay? Then the next day, or okay, so the next time they test, let's say they tested on the 23rd. 323, 323. This student wasn't there. Bobby wasn't there. Lori wasn't there. Debbie was there on the 23rd. Sonia was there on the 23rd. Again, you put the number of minutes. So for science, the number of minutes is, let's see real quick, the number of minutes for science is, I remember where to, make sure you know where it's stated. So in your directions, when you read it to the students, it says it here. You have 55 minutes. Remember, this is test for science for timing code 7. Make sure you're always checking these on each day. So 55, so I'm put 55 here, and let's say it took Michael 50 minutes, Cynthia 45 minutes, and let's say it took Debbie, Debbie and Sonia did not finish. I'll put 55. They did not finish the test when time was called, you put 55. Okay, so then Bobby and Lori come to school the next day. They take the test. So let's say I'm making this up, 324. All right, so they take the test and you put the time. So let's say it's 55 here, and let's say it's 10. Okay, now you must, so you need a calculator. So you take your calculator out, not a cell phone, calculator. You take your calculator out and you add up these minutes, 62, 82, 41, and 50. Again, don't circle these. I'm just reminding you what to do. And you put the time here, the number of minutes. So number of minutes. So this has to be completed. Every student that's listed here, you have to have a time. Okay, now, this was timing code 7 as an example, but let's say you had timing code 5. Let's say you were the individual that had timing code 5. Timing code 5 is stop the clock breaks. So, and there might be a few of you with timing code 5. So let's go to timing code 5 just to kind of inform you what that is. So timing code 5 starts on page 86. On page 86. That's timing code 5, 86. So timing code 5 is standard time over multiple days. Standard time over multiple days, or single session with authorized stop the clock breaks. Single session with authorized stop the clock breaks. So standard time over multiple days, that's timing code 5, or single session with authorized stop the clock breaks. So if you have a situation where your student is single session with authorized stop the clock breaks, here's what that means. So let's suppose that, and let me go ahead and do it here. Let's suppose, and this is where it's very important that the room supervisor is keeping accurate time. So this is stop the clock. So you have a situation where it's stop the clock. Okay. So let's suppose that student A leaves the takes test one. Let's say this is test one. Test one. So student A works for 10 minutes. Then leaves the room, goes to the bathroom, let's say for 5 minutes. So you got to keep track of the breaks. So you have a break column, 5 minutes. Comes back, takes a test for let's say 15 minutes, leaves the room for let's say 7 minutes. And then comes back, and let's say the student takes the whole time to take the test. So comes back and let's say works on the test for 20 minutes, leaves the room for a break. Let's say the break is 4 minutes. And then you would do this process again. So the student comes back, and keep in mind that the test one is 45 minutes for stop the clock. So 45 minutes. So for timing code 5. So remember, timing code 5 could either be standard time over multiple days. That could be their authorized accommodation, or timing code 5 could be students with authorized stop the clock breaks. All right, so also keep in mind, if you have a situation where yours is stop the clock break, there can only be one student in that room. You can't have any other students. So make sure it's important that you read this part here, stop the clock breaks. So if more than one examinee is authorized for stop the clock breaks, each must test individually in separate rooms. So if you have stop the clock break, then that means that there should be one name on this list. No other names needs to be here. One name for stop the clock break. Timing code 5, that's stop the clock break. Okay? All right, so keep in mind that for student A, let's say that's the name, student A, you should only have one here though. You're only taking care of one student because you are only responsible for one student. Only one student can test in that room. All of this must add up to no more than, for test 1, remember this is test 1. Test 1, it was 45 minutes. So keep track of your time. So test 1 is 45 minutes. This should not be no more than 45 minutes. So it's very important you're keeping accurate time. So let's say the student took the whole time, 45 minutes. Okay, and let's say it was only those 3 breaks right here. So then you would add up these minutes. So 9 plus 7 is 16 minutes. So there are 16 minutes for stop the clock break. So this amount for, remember, test 1 is 45 minutes for stop the clock. So that's the number of minutes the student worked on the test. This is the number of minutes the student took a break. So when you fill out that form, remember this is stop the clock break we're talking about now. One name, and then you would put the date, the number of minutes the student took the test. So this right here would go here. And then this right here, the 16 minutes for the break, would go here. Okay? So that's where you would put the number of minutes for stop the clock breaks. So the total break minutes used. So 16 would go here. I'm sorry. I need to rephrase that. So you would do test 1, then you would do test 2, test 2, then you do test 3, then you would do test 4. So you do the same thing for all these. Then you would add up all of this, and that would go here. So the number of minutes for the break here, the number of minutes for the break here, number of minutes for the break here, number of minutes for the break here goes here. Okay? The minutes here, so you put the date and the minutes. The minutes here are the minutes it took the students to actually take the test. So in this case, it took the students 45 minutes. So you put 45 here. Do not put the total time the student was in the room. The number of minutes here is the number of minutes it took the student to work on the test. The minutes that go here are the minutes, the break time for each of those tests. So this was 16 minutes it took the student break time, and this student took 5 minutes of break time, and this student for test 3 took 6 minutes of break time. Then you add up all those break time minutes, and that goes here. Okay, so If you are timing code 5, which stop the clock breaks, it's very important you keep track of each test. So test 1, number of minutes and their break. Test 2, number of minutes and their break. Test 3, number of minutes and the break time, and so on. You add up all the total minutes of break time, and that will go here. Okay, so, and then at the bottom you would say, is there an irregularity report regarding timing? Yes or no? Hopefully you will say no. There should always be no. If you say yes, then we have an issue. Okay. All right, so that should take care of this room report. So that's the room report for accommodations.